So in this session, we'll be talking about how couples can join hands in the journey.
Well, the way the hands are joined is to begin to understand why they fell in love in the first place, which is, what is romantic love and why does that happen?
It has components that are driven by chemicals that are released in the body when you fall in love, like dopamine goes way up and testosterone goes up.
It was very chemical. After that first day, when we went on our first date, I thought he was the funniest person I'd ever met, and I thought that was incredibly attractive.
The characteristics of romantic love, as an experience, is that people have this sense of, well, I've known you before, haven't we met? Because there's a sense of familiarity. And there's also a sense of, it seems like I've always known you. It's like there's a sense of eternity here.
I've never felt as comfortable with an individual in my life as I did with her so quickly. I mean, within the first 2 months or so, I literally felt like I knew her for years.
And it's clear to us that when you fall in love, you've fallen in love with someone who is your imago match, meaning that they have traits and characteristics and behaviors similar to your own earlier caretakers. And that the behaviors that they do in the relationship will trigger your memories of those caretakers, and especially the negative memories.
The power struggle emerges when the illusion wears off and the dopamine wears off and you realize the otherness of your partner.
I think the important thing to say about the power struggle is that it's the second stage in all relationships.
And gradually, the very quality that felt absolutely wonderful and irresistible will begin to irritate me. And I want you to change. Now, I fell in love for you being who you were, but now who you are is a source of irritation. You haven't changed, the same person, but I now have a different experience of the same event.
We are destined to pick somebody who's going to trigger us in some very specific and concrete ways, like nobody else can.
As a child growing up, my mother had a very strong influence as to how I approached life or how I did or didn't do things. And one of the things that attracted me to Anne when we first met was that she also was a very strong-willed person. And as they say, the things that you love about a person when you first meet them, you end up hating later.
I do think that even though this felt light to me, that there is something very much there on just maybe how I used to react with Bill about wanting him to act certain ways and feeling a little uptight and wanting to kind of direct him out in public.
She might be uptight about, we're going to go someplace and I don't want you to embarrass us, because I'd had a habit of putting my foot in my mouth many a times in public and saying things that I probably shouldn't.
So what we've discovered when people fall in love is they fall in love with somebody who is a complement to them. There's a complementarity. One is they're very different from each other. They have the same wound, but they respond to it in different ways. One of them responds to their sensitivities by just climbing up and shutting down, and we call that person a turtle. He goes inside or she goes inside, and they hide inside, and they build a pretty hard shell. The other one responds to their sensitivities with extravagant energy. They just escalate, and they go into intense emotions and so forth. And we call that person the hailstorm. And then when they get married, what they liked before they got married becomes something they dislike after they get married. And the turtle says, "You're just too noisy." And the hailstorm says, "You're just, so remote."
I'm a turtle.
I'm a hailstorm. I'm a hailstorm.
I've never been a real verbal, loud fighter. I would be the kind to withdraw, and she would be the kind to she would try to pull things out of me, and the more she pulled, the further I pushed away.
If you're having troubles and you're struggling, more than likely, that means you're in a relationship with the right person, the person who is just right to maximize your healing and personal growth.
And we ask couples to rethink the conflict in their relationship as a bad thing to conflict being growth trying to happen. And that it's that conflict in the relationship which is the yeast that's trying to give birth to a new way to be together.
We came to this process probably after some really tumultuous years, and just a lot of distance had grown in our relationship, and I know I was ready to give up.
It was quite tumultuous, the relationship, and we just kept going further and further apart. We were kind of at the point where try it or get a divorce lawyer.
The point we're making has nothing to do with blaming your parents, that it has to do with describing the psychological developmental stages of all human beings as they grow up with parents, and that we've known in the field of psychology for 100 years that the past influences the present, that this is just the way it is.
Focusing on our childhood sometimes can perpetuate it, but it's not about being stuck there. It's about understanding and gaining insight into how we respond when those places get touched.
I think I'm a better person now than I was before because I understand why I do some of the things that I do and how that's tied into my childhood.
If I really get it, how Helen's childhood was and how that's connected to how she responds to me and the things that I can trigger in her, then it helps me develop a lot of empathy for her.
I don't want to be a harming source. I want to become a healing source for my partner. So in that way, understanding his underneath, him understanding my underneath, this is how couples heal.
It's one of the most important things that can happen to anybody in the world is to fall in love, because it offers you such a depth of understanding about who you are, what your history has been, and what your potential is. And it's such an ecstatic experience that you get a taste of what it would feel like all the time if you weren't wounded, if you had all your parts working, if you were in your original state. I call it the taste of the elixir of being. And it's a promise of what you can have in your partnership if you will go through the process of helping each other heal and become whole.
I'd like to have an Imago dialogue with you to share our childhood frustration. Is now a good time?
Yes, I'm available.
When I was a child, when my parents would get invited to other people's houses, we rarely, if ever, got to go along. And I was told that it was because we were too wild to be in other people's houses. But ironically, when those other people came to our house, their kids came to our house, and they were wilder than we ever thought about being.
So let me see if I've got you. Your childhood frustration is that when you were little and your parents went to other people's house to socialize, they didn't take you, and they told you it was because you were all too wild to go to other people's houses. But when other people would come to your house, they'd bring their children, and their children were wilder than you ever thought about being. Did I get you?
Yes.
Is there more?
Yes. When this happened, I felt that they really didn't want us around, that we embarrassed them, and that rather similar to what you experienced as a child, rather than telling us how they wanted us to act or what to say or what not to say, it was just easier to leave us behind and not even take us to places with them. So that was it was hurtful.
So you're saying that you just felt like they didn't want you around, and unlike my parents who would tell me how to act when I went to other places, for them it was just easier not to even take you, and that was very hurtful, that they didn't even want you around.
And it made me feel that they were embarrassed by us.
And it made you feel that they were embarrassed by you. Is there more?
No.
Okay. So, in summary, what you're saying is that when your parents went to other people's houses, they didn't take you. They told you you were too wild to go to other people's houses. And what you realized was when other people came to your house and brought their children were much wilder than you ever thought about being. And so you believe your parents were embarrassed to have you with them, and that they just found it easier to leave you behind. Is that a good summary?
Yes.
Okay. I've listened carefully to what you've said, and you make sense. And I imagine you felt embarrassed and rejected, hurt. Is that what you felt?
Yes, I felt embarrassed, felt rejected, and angry, and hurt.
So you also felt angry and hurt, plus embarrassed and rejected. Those feelings make sense. I can see how you felt that way. Thank you for sharing this with me.
Thank you for listening.
You're welcome.